Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Kailvin's Consulting. I'm your lovely host, Kailvin, and today we've got a couple of questions that we're going to be covering. And the first one is the one that's on everyone's mind. I've gotten about 24 emails about this, but I have decided to compress all of the questions into one that I feel properly describes the public opinion on the matter, and that is, Google is buying Twitch. Is this bad or literally worse than Hitler? Now, in order to answer this question, we're going to have to take a look at this. This is a business deal after all, and I would like to remind you that it isn't immediately going through. Google came out immediately after Variety's article, gave a hit to the Wall Street Journal and said they were only in the preliminary talks and that any deal was well far away and had not been made yet. So I would like to preface that by saying that. Or preface this by saying that, much better. So, we have to look first at the short term. In the short term, if this deal were to go through, then Twitch would be getting a gigantic influx of capital. We have to remember that Google has more money than Scrooge McDuck. Okay? Like, Scrooge McDuck has a pool of money big enough for himself to swim around in. Google, though. Google has a pool of money big enough for pretty much everyone in the company to swim around in, let's face it. So, Twitch would be getting a huge injection of capital. What would they do with that injection of capital? Well, for one, I'd hope they might actually, get working EU servers. We could all desperately hope for that. I'm not even in the EU, but I feel bad, when I watch streamers from the EU whose streams just randomly lag for no apparent reason. And in the short term, I could actually say Twitch being bought out by Google is actually a very good thing. We could even in potential see, perhaps better ad inventories. That would be great. From what I know from people who are partnered with Twitch, per view versus, say, YouTube, Twitch's ad rates are terrible. And how goddamn often do you see, oh man, I remember I actually use AdBlock on Twitch for a lot of channels these days. And that's because one time, during the US election campaign, I'd like to remind everyone I'm Canadian, I got a unskippable 1.5 hour Ron Paul ad. For a while there, afterwards I actually used AdBlock on Twitch. I have since taken it off for many of my favorite streamers, but needless to say, the trust between me and Twitch is not there. One of the things as a consumer that you can expect too is that the ads you see are not completely and utterly ridiculous or stupid or offensive. And that is a rightful thing as a consumer to do. And if a website breaches your trust in that, by all means, use AdBlock. That's pretty much what it's for. A lot of people use it on the entire internet, but I'm not here to comment about that. So we could see, an improved ad inventory for Twitch, which would result in better ad earnings for a lot of streamers, and the potential for streaming to grow into a bigger thing as more people can move into it as a more professional hobby. A lot of the times right now, we see pretty much streamers surviving on subscriptions alone, let's face it. Streaming is not exactly that good. It's definitely not. But, if they were to merge with YouTube and inherit YouTube's ad inventory, then there would be hope. However, we have the other problem of YouTube doesn't actually have a full ad inventory. Right now, I believe the fill rate on YouTube is only about 70 or 80%? Yeah. So that means, 30% of users don't get ads because there aren't enough ads. Which, this is in part fault of advertising agencies as well as consumers. There is something called the theory of peak advertising on the internet. That basically states that we as consumers have grown resistant to internet advertisements. Which might just be because of how many fucking things we've seen of them. Let's face it here. I remember the statistic from it. The first banner ad on the internet had a 75, this was in 1994 by the way, a 75% click-through rate. That means 75% of people who saw the advertisement clicked on it. Nowadays, it's 0.005% most of the time for click-through rates. Yeah, so advertising ain't what it once was on the internet, but I'll link the study, actually, in the description. It's very interesting. And one of those things I recommend for a read if you've got about 30 minutes to throw away. And, one can hope that overall situation with that would improve. But it might just hurt YouTube more to be creating more video content with less advertisements, and could in fact hurt everybody with that respect, because if there's more video content but less advertisements, then prices go down. And that will negatively affect not only the streamers, but YouTube itself as well. So yeah, I do have to be a bit cautious about that. And honestly, I don't think I'm qualified to say exactly which will happen. I am not someone with a degree in business, so I really honestly cannot say exactly which will happen. But that's more or less the short-term effects of this. But we also have to look at the long-term effects. Right now, Google has an undisputed monopoly on pretty much, I suppose, video on demand. So yeah, let's call it video on demands. VODs, if you would. Whereas Twitch has I suppose, a monopoly, but not entirely a monopoly. There is competition. It's just not as big as Twitch. Twitch is the leader of the group, shall we say. And as a result of that, the two biggest monopolies fusing together. Now, there is a lot of problems with that. Yeah. There can be a huge number of problems with that. In general, as far as I'm concerned, anything that causes YouTube to grow at this point into a larger monopoly is a terrible thing. It's hard to really, talk about it, but in general, this means that YouTube can get away with doing whatever it wants, and basically doesn't suffer because of the position it's in. I mean, all we have to do is look a few months ago at the Google Plus change. Yeah. Google can act, or rather by proxy, YouTube, can pretty much act with impunity and do whatever it wants and abuse the living shit out of its user base. And what can we do about it? Nothing. That's because they're a frickin' monopoly. And this is why monopolies are very often considered bad, without an extreme amount of regulation to it. So, that's a big problem. So YouTube acquiring Twitch and basically injecting a bunch of capital into it would seal the deal that Twitch would become a YouTube-like monopoly. Right now, there's a Zubu, there's MLG, there are other streaming services that exist that, actually do have viewership to them. Nowhere near as much as Twitch, but they exist and are, more than a speck of dust compared to Twitch. We're looking at viewer rates as high as 5% of Twitch, 10%. It's not too bad, but like I said, I think I still have to class that as Twitch having a monopoly on everything. So, the YouTube monopoly expanding, and especially into an entirely new region, risks a whole slew of things, because Google and YouTube can be a bit unpredictable when they decide to do things. Yeah. That's all I really have to say on the matter. We do have to be cautious about the expanding monopoly, but in the short term, it could very likely be very good for Twitch. There's also let's go back to the short term. There's also the chance that some of Twitch's, technology propagates back to YouTube. Who am I kidding? Of course there will be. And, I think we're already seeing a bit of that. In the most recent YouTube creator update, they announced that they'll be adding in a tip jar system. Which is actually the next question. Which is, terrible tangent. Let's do it. YouTube in the most recent update announced that it will be adding in a tip jar service. How do you think that this will affect YouTube and the content creators? Well, I think it's going to be very positive. Let's face it here, we see a lot of people turning towards Patreon. And this ties into what I was talking about before with the theory of internet peak advertising. Which, like I said, states that we are going to have some problems in the future trying to rely on advertisement as a form of income. Patreon and, Subbable and all that stuff have most definitely helped alleviate this problem, I think. It's getting content creators through the drought. It's not a be-all, end-all solution. However, a YouTube-style tip jar, or sub thing, such as Twitch has, is a much better solution. Because this also means that a portion of the money goes to the service you're using. So, this means that Twitch doesn't have to rely solely on advertisements, for example. It can rely on sub-income, and turbo, and so on, and etc. And this is a good thing. It's a new revenue stream. Generally speaking, it is generally good, but as it comes to question as to whether or not I use it, I will probably not. I'm going to go with probably not, unless it gives something to the people. I try and avoid taking, donations and tips and all that other stuff as much as I can, unless you are really vehement about throwing money at me. Please, give it to a charity instead. There are people who need it far more than I do. And that's sort of the thing. A lot of people, and especially streamers, are really guilty of this, where they just flat out advertise donators and take donations and all that other stuff. I personally think that's shameful, but, some people think it's okay, and that's fine by me. Different strokes for different folks and all that stuff. But unless the tip jar provides some sort of service to you guys, such as perhaps removing ads from the videos, that is a valid service, and, if it had something like that tied to it, then actually that would help solve the fact that YouTube doesn't have a full fill rate, for one, and two, it'd be providing a service. And personally, I hope they do that when they implement the tip jar, because that's a win-win for everybody, really, more than anything. And, that's, I'm not certain whether or not it's going to be a big hit. Probably, I have a bad feeling it'll be used the way it's used on Twitch, with donations as it currently stands, in which, at the start of every episode, we'll have these YouTubers with 5 subs or whatever, just any old one taking these donations and advertising them at the start and end of every episode. Hey, you can donate to help me out, down there, the tip jar button, and so on, etc. And I really fear that that's going to diminish the quality on YouTube that we've come to expect. But then again, it's not my place to say about that, because the way, we exist here on YouTube is the idea that we are a much cheaper form of television, pretty much. We have a much lower cost of production than television, and, garner a fair amount of views by comparison. So, we have that going for us. I guess whatever the hell people want to watch, I'm free to watch it. I don't have to agree with it, though. So that's probably going to be the outcome of the YouTube tip jar. We're going to see YouTubers acting a lot more like streamers do, I'm afraid. Which will likely mean, every last little friggin' 5 sub guys going to have their own little tip jar, and begging for tips all the goddamn time. And I'm not pleased about it, but it's a step in the right direction. I just hope that there is regulation and control on it. And finally, for the final question, can you better explain the difference between managed and affiliate channels when talking about YouTube networks? Now, this question actually only comes maybe a week after MCN Freedom, which is a multi-channel network, announced that it basically was going to be taking all of its managed channels and making it affiliates. Now, I saw this coming a mile away when it was formed about 6 months ago. Now, for those of you that don't know, about 6 months ago, Google basically said, hey, MCNs, you're not doing your job. I made a video on this, by the way, and I will be sure to link that in the description. And Google said, hey, MCNs, you're not doing your job, so we're going to make you do your job. Alright? And they split groups into managed and affiliates. Managed people are the people that the network is directly responsible for. Whereas affiliates, the network holds no responsibility, but still has the ability to take a cut of their profits, which, makes many people look at affiliate statuses and say, wow, that's rather unfair. And to a degree, that's very true. But we also have to look at the pressure that's on the networks. In the last couple of months, I've been gathering more information from my network of contacts, shall we say, throughout the YouTube industry, and I have learned that networks can actually only take a grand total of 20 copyright strikes. If they have 20 copyright strikes, they get shut down. That's actually, for when we're talking about networks in the thousands, that's not much. It's kind of rough to think, because each person can incur 3 copyright strikes. That means, 7 people is enough to shut down a network? Yeah. If 7 channels ever got hit all at once, poof. And before they get shut down, they start taking penalties on. As an example, at 10 copyright strikes, then the network loses 20% of its income. Basically meaning that Google takes an extra 20% cut from all the network's income. And I believe at 15, I think, then all network partners lose the ability to put out thumbnails on their videos. At 5, just 5, by the way, 5 copyright strikes, every member of the network will lose its ability to live stream on YouTube Live. So you have to start realizing that's actually a pretty strict regime YouTube's got going there. And there's not much wiggle room. You know, a few copyright strikes here and there, and suddenly everyone can't do YouTube Live, and shit's hitting the fan. Yeah, that's not great. I do admit, I think they need to be a little more lenient than that, but we'll see. YouTube might change its policy in the future. So, that's why networks in general are so hesitant to make people managed, because any strike that hits a managed channel also hits the network. And unless it's resolved on that video, even if that person leaves the network and has strikes unresolved, those strikes stay with the network until it's resolved on that video. That is actually a lot of responsibility, you know, for a company that basically doesn't have direct control over what the user makes. Like, a few people, like... And so with that, you know, there isn't much wiggle room for the networks, so I kind of sympathize with them on what they're doing. And as I was talking about with MCN Freedom, they promised to make everybody a managed channel, which, well, based on the information I've just told you, when they're partnering over 1,000 channels, which they are at this current time, it's impossible. It would be suicidal. Just completely. You can't do that. Like, it really is. And it's just not something they could do, so they stopped doing it. Now I was saying, well, what about all the broken promises? Well, MCN Freedom was founded by the guy who founded TGN TV. And basically, I want to say he's a scam artist. But Occam's razor tells me that, you know, he's just incompetent. Back when he ran TGN, it was found that TGN was snipping a little bit extra off the top. It doesn't allow users to view their analytics, so it's all controlled. The numbers TGN shows you are the only numbers you get. And they were manipulating some of the numbers behind the scenes to take a little extra money for themselves, it was found. Yeah, that didn't go over so well. So what George did, I don't know the guy's last name, I'm not going to bother looking it up right now. I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me it, and I'll put an annotation right here that will give you his actual full name. George basically fled, blamed it all on broadband TV, and started anew. And this is his new network, MCN Freedom, where everyone's managed. Except, oh wait, that didn't work, and now you're all stuck in 60-40 contracts for a year. So you could see why I might want to attribute it to malice, because there was a decent amount of money on the line in that case. But like I said, Occam's razor. I just consider him an incompetent person. And, you know, that's sort of how things had to happen. I knew it was going to happen. I called it back then. I think Marbazir called it. Everybody I know was like, that ain't going to last. Like, anyone who's a decent-sized YouTuber could tell that wasn't going to last. Anyone who actually knew what was going on, we all knew that wasn't going to last. Nothing new. But that's going to do it, folks. So that's 3 more questions from you guys. Well, actually, if you count all the emails I got about Google buying Twitch, I answered... Hang on. I'm selecting them all here. 31 questions today. Haha. Man, wow. 31 questions today. I'm good. So, if you liked the video and the information provided, please press the like button at the bottom of the screen. It really does help out the channel. And, for future-proofing, if there's a tip jar down there, please feel free to donate to it. If not, well, hopefully it'll be there someday. See? Already just the threat of it existing is making content worse. Also, if you would like to see more of my content, don't forget to subscribe for daily videos of video gaming and intelligent commentary. As always, this has been your lovely, lovely host, Kailvin, signing off.